You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 19th of December 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, we'll hear from a former Biden administration official who believes the US needs to rethink its relationship with Israel. From there, we'll turn to how governments can better nudge us into healthier behaviors. Yes, we are going to give you some health tips just before you gorge for the holidays. And then
you get the essence of really that sense of generosity that you just need to kind of do all this planning. It has to be right. But then when people arrive, just let yourself go and it's all about the moment.
Konfekt editor Sophie Grove on how to prepare the perfect festive gathering. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. A very happy Friday to all of our listeners. Hope you're getting ready for the start of next week and the holidays. Happy to have you on The Briefing. We will start with Israel. Its long and extremely close relationship with the United States. The US has generally backed Israel unapologetically, including in international fora, even when most other countries have balked. That exceptional relationship has started to fray over the past couple of years of the war in Gaza. Well, Andrew Miller is Senior Fellow in National Security and International Policy at the Center for American Progress. He was also Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Israeli-Palestinian Affairs under former President Biden. And Miller's new essay, The End of the Israel Exception for Foreign Affairs, marks the first time that a senior Biden official has argued for a big change in the relationship with Israel. Well, he joins us now, and Andrew, it is great to have you here on the program. I did want to first of all take you back to your time in the Biden administration, because the course of action in the weeks and months, even after the October 7th attacks, will have been clear from everything I can imagine. But was there a point where you remember the conversation shifting, whether some people were advocating that a change in approach to Israel might be needed?
That conversation about changing our posture towards Israel or towards the war really didn't begin to materialize until late spring of 2024. So it took a considerable period of time. And with each campaign or with each operation in Gaza, the concerns about how Israel was conducting the war and the impact it was having on the civilian population in Gaza increased. So Gaza City first, very destructive. There was hope that Khan Yunis, which was next, would be conducted with greater care for the civilian population. That didn't happen. And then in the spring is when the Israelis began talking about the need for an operation in Rafah, where the vast majority of the population had fled from the cities in the north and the center. It was at that point that the aperture for alternative approaches to Israel, as well as different tools, opened up to at least have a conversation.
And even if there was a conversation, did it, I guess, remain at a conversation? Did you ever feel that there was a groundswell, even a majority of people talking about considering a change in approach, or did it never really reach that point while you were there?
At the most senior level, it never reached a critical mass. I think at the mid-levels where I was serving and the ranking staff, there was more of a consensus that we needed to try to do something differently because the results were not good for the United States, they weren't good for the Palestinians, and they weren't good for Israel either. But there was a degree of, if not resistance, a degree of inelasticity from the most senior leadership. And it's still not entirely clear to me to what degree they were channeling President Biden explicitly, or they were just assuming this is what he wanted. And because of the role I played and my position at state, I didn't have the same degree of access to those conversations in the White House that I would have had I been at the NSC, for instance.
Now, Andrew, this has been a challenge for so many administrations, as you write about. Has this been about genuine conviction for senior officials and presidents, or has it also been about public perception if the U.S. were to try and leverage something like military aid?
I think there certainly is an element of domestic politics and the concerns about how it would be received in the United States amongst certain communities. Of course, the American Jewish community, but not exclusively. There are many communities that are still, very pro-Israel and concerned about the direction of the country. So there are examples in U.S. history where U.S. presidents have been willing to use leverage, and they've been successful in either changing Israeli conduct at a tactical or an operational level. But on the question of the motivations, it really is specific to each president and to each administration. With President Biden, I think it's clear that he had a genuine attachment to and has a genuine attachment to Israel, and he was almost constitutionally unable to contemplate certain types of pressure on Israel as a result of that. It wasn't exclusively a domestic political calculation, as some people had assumed.
Now, Andrew, what's interesting about some of your arguments as well is that you say it would be in Israel's own interest, security interests, to have a different relationship with the United States. You talk about Biden's motivations being genuine there, but explain this idea for us that, say, it would have helped Biden and Israel to be more stable, more secure today if the U.S. were able to exercise greater leverage.
I think that Israel, as of today, compared to October 6, 2023, the achievements that they made militarily were exclusively militarily, not political. And in some instances, they've been overstated. It's true that Hamas is not capable at this time of launching another October 7th style attack, and that is certainly a positive development. But that doesn't mean it's going to continue to remain unable to do so. And the success Israel has recorded against Hezbollah and Iran is tenuous. It could be easily reversed. So I think on either side, those who are arguing that it's definitely going to be an adverse security environment for Israel versus those who are arguing it's definitely going to be an improved security environment should treat their projections with a degree of humility, because they don't know how it's going to play out. But what has been clear, and what I think is indisputable, is that Israel's international standing with the United States, but also, and more severely with other countries, has deteriorated sharply. And to play on a phrase, it's almost the inverse of normalization, where Israel previously was establishing normal relationships, diplomatic relations with more and more countries. And now Israelis are thinking twice about whether they travel to certain European countries for fear of being referred to the ICC or some other international legal body. So Israel is being treated as a pariah, whether one agrees with that or not. That was not the case prior to this war. And it's a direct impact of the way in which the war was conducted, as well as, I think, the nature of this Israeli government, which even those folks who are the most supportive of Israel historically had difficulty identifying or rooting for someone like Bezalel Smotrich or Itamar Ben-Gvir, whose ideologies are explicitly and unapologetically racist.
Well, just finally, Andrew, I mean, you described there Israel becoming a pariah, whether we agree with that or not. I'm curious to talk about how this has impacted the conversation in the U.S. Have you sensed a change? We have seen some kind of shift in the U.S., more support for Palestinian causes, more opposition to what happened in Gaza. Will that make it easier for future administrations to exercise leverage on Israel?
From both the polling I've seen and a variety of actions we've seen from both Democrats and Republicans in Congress and elsewhere, I think it's clear that support for Israel is lower than it's been since its founding. And the numbers do bear that out. It's true for Democrats, it's true for independents, and it's true for Republicans. Now, the magnitude of the decline varies. With Republicans, you still have a clear majority supporting Israel. But for Democrats, now you have a majority of those who affiliate with the party viewing Israel negatively, and a very similar result for independents. And that does create an opportunity to potentially exercise more leverage, because a president doesn't have to be as concerned about a backlash politically for applying some type of leverage on Israel. However, it also creates the risk, and to the point we were just discussing on what's in the best interest of Israel or the relationship, that there could be a break, a fundamental rupture in the relationship. So recognizing that there is this growing discontent with Israel amongst the American public, trying to maintain this exceptional treatment makes it more likely that any adjustment that's coming down the pike is going to be radical and disruptive, rather than one that is more gradual and calibrated, that reflects continued shared interest in security and intelligence, but that also can account for divergences on values, divergences on certain issues.
Andrew Miller, Senior Fellow in National Security and International Policy at the Center for American Progress and formerly a Biden official. Thank you so much for joining us today on the program. Now here's Anita Riota with today's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. We have some breaking news here, with Ukrainian drones having just blown up a Russian oil tanker in the Mediterranean. The strike on the Russian Shadow Fleet tanker is the first to be carried out between Kyiv and Moscow in the Mediterranean Sea. U.S. Homeland Security has suspended their green card lottery, saying it was used by the suspect in a mass shooting at Brown University. The U.S. green card lottery grants up to 55,000 permanent resident visas annually to people from countries with low rates of immigration to the United States. One of South Korea's most renowned theater actors, Yoon Suk-hwa, has died at the age of 69. Yoon debuted in 1975 with the play The Taste of Honey and rose to prominence through roles in Agnes of God, Hamlet, and A Letter to My Daughter. She was regarded as one of the country's leading figures of the stage. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Anita, and we will have more on Russia-Ukraine, including Vladimir Putin's end-of-year press conference, which was taking place as Ukraine's security services announced the tanker attack on the Monocle Daily later on today. Now, as we enter the holidays, many of us will be steeling ourselves for Christmas dinners, chocolates, other goodies with the family. But for that moment when you do get back to better habits, the British government has been trying to nudge people towards healthier options in supermarkets, basically by moving around where the good stuff is and hoping it'll catch your eye. Well, it is based on the theories of behavioural economics and what's known as nudging, the sort of little things to get you to behave better. But is it enough? Well, our next guest argues we need to do a little more than just rearrange the supermarket shelves to encourage healthier habits. Ed Houghton is Director of Research and Insights at DG Cities and joins me now. Ed, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So we are stealing for the holidays, but explain what the British government is trying to do to help us be healthy, first of all.
So I think it's good to think about this. It's an interesting approach. It's a positive approach in a sense that it's looking to help us to make better decisions in how shopping shelves are organized and items are positioned to make it more likely that we select the healthy option. But there are various critiques and challenges in this approach that I think require a bit more of a nuanced understanding that you've highlighted in your opening. One of the challenges that we recognize, and I think we see this in our work in understanding complexity, is it isn't only obviously the positioning of an item that makes you more likely to select it. And in particular, when it comes to healthy food options, people often don't have the information they require to make the right decision. So simply moving things about, making them more likely to select it for positioning, isn't the only way to look at the challenge. And so our view is to take a more nuanced view around the complexity of what's driving decision making. That's the science of behavioral science, to appreciate how and why people make decisions, and to change the way in which we build policies and processes to help people to make much better decisions. And so obviously I don't want to be a kind of bar humbug when it comes to calories over Christmas. But it is important that people have the opportunity to make the right decision. And one of the kind of critiques of the classic nudge approach is perhaps that it isn't transparent and it isn't democratic and people don't have choice. And I think that's one of the elements that when it comes to this approach that the government is taking that it's not really picked up enough.
Well, and as you say, when people don't have choice, I mean, that's part of what this is about and what you're proposing, I guess, sort of more of a Venn diagram approach that accounts for like socioeconomic factors, if you could explain that.
Yes, of course. So we need to understand people in the place that they are and what drives their decision making. And so the challenge with things like calorie labeling, for example, is it just takes the false assumption that people choose unhealthy food simply because they lack the data to make the better decision. There's been research by the Cochrane, I think, was the most well-known piece of study, which highlighted that actually eating choices, healthy eating, are driven by price, they're driven by habit, they're driven by taste preference, they're driven by hunger. You know, we've all had that experience doing the shopping when we're hungry before dinner. It's a bad choice. We make choices that we regret when we get to the till. And so I think it's important to recognize individuals as complex people who make decisions and to appreciate the way in which we can help people to make decisions by providing them with clearer information and guidance to do that. And I think you can do this not just at the level of individual decision making, and this is where we're taking our research into the future, is we do this approach that's called behavioral systems mapping, where we think about the systems of different actors like organizations, institutions, governments, and shops in how they think about the challenge of healthy eating. So instead of putting the pressure on us as individuals to make the right decision, also how can organizations around the system of the decision make it easier for us, make it more likely for us to make a decision that's beneficial to us and the communities, our families, and the wider system that we live in. That's the challenge, I think. That's the kind of critique of nudge, is that it's very much on the individual level of decision making, as opposed to seeing these challenges as wider systemic issues.
And do I understand correctly then when you talk about the wider systemic that you're sort of talking about the middle here? I mean, if we're not talking about the individual, is there evidence that, say, communities and some of these systems you talk about are more likely to work together? So kind of putting the onus on local groups of people, community groups of people, or like the supermarkets, does that yield results, the sort of middle ground between the national level, the government, and the individual?
Yeah, so I think this is the really exciting area of research in this space. So we're undertaking research as part of the government's Digital Inclusion Innovation Fund. It's outside of the space of healthy eating, but I think it really highlights how if you take an approach that incorporates community and local government and individuals in the process of understanding what's driving behavior, you can get closer to the reality of what's happening on the ground and the type of project or policies that are more likely to be ineffective. So we're working around this really significant challenge in the UK of helping older people to be more connected to one another and to utilize smartphones and digital connectivity to be what we call digitally included. And in the UK, there's a significant number, about 33% of older people, those over 65, don't use a smartphone regularly, which means that they can't access important services like the NHS or to do their banking online. And so our approach in the research that we're conducting with 5 local authorities across the UK is to bring together local authority leaders, councillors, community leaders around the table to understand actually what is driving the challenge of digital exclusion, and how can behavioural interventions and policies be designed to help people to make more effective decisions for themselves and to become more digitally included. This is counter to the kind of historic approach to this type of work, I think, in government, which is to do a policy, put the policy out into the world, run some interventions and measure and evaluate how they work without appreciating, I think, the complexity of the system in which it's operating. So this approach I'm really hopeful of seeing actually helping us to diagnose the challenge and bring communities together to try and solve it. I think that's the only way we can tackle some of these really complex challenges facing our communities and neighborhoods.
Just finally, Ed, I mean, with all of this, I guess one of the challenges is that there is a cost associated with things. I mean, that's maybe why nudging alone is popular for, say, the UK government or any other government for that matter. It's free. That's what attracts them to the idea. If you're going into sort of community involvement, different approaches that do involve money, I guess talk to us about that. How are you trying to get governments involved to maybe put money where it matters most? I'm thinking of, examples we've had on Monocle is also, say, lower regional train costs in order to get people to take public transport more. You're seeing that in many European countries. But again, that kind of thing does come at a cost.
It does. I mean, cost and economic incentives are obviously a major element of behavioral economics and behavioral science that we need to really recognize in some of the situations we're dealing with. So we know local authorities in particular in the UK are hard pressed for money, and they have to make sound decisions that enable them to make the most of what they have. The limitations, I think, with nudge type approaches or policies in their current guise is that they are very short term in the way that they lead to impact. And so the kind of cost benefit of some of these approaches, whilst it might be low cost in the short term to run an intervention, as you've described, in a way that is cost effective, it actually may not be in the long term, when you evaluate it, effective in terms of the way that it generates benefits to people. And so I think this lens in which we look at the challenges we're facing is to how can we leverage the value of the local systems that we're working in to generate the resources without necessarily relying on investment in the sense that we see as being very limited. This is why I think this engagement with community is so key, is because we can leverage, we can engage people who are volunteering in their community to make a real difference, to give them the resources to make that difference, and bring them into these discussions with their local leaders, with their local authorities, through their communities, to actually create impact on the ground without necessarily leaning on the bank to help us to do that. That's not to say we shouldn't seek investment. It's important, it's critical really in local authority sectors to do that. But in the situation we're in, we also have to think about how we can create change in a cost-effective, low-cost manner. And I think this approach of really recognizing the nature of resources and bringing communities together to diagnose and understand the challenges together, it's transparent, it's open, and I think it's going to lead to much more sustainable change.
Well, I hope we can also all be kind to ourselves over the next few weeks of the holidays as well when it comes to our behaviours and health. Ed Houghton, Director of Research and Insights at DG Cities, thank you so much for joining us today and unpacking all of that. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And finally, on today's show, it is the latest installment of our weekly winter series where we tap Monocle's editors and leading contributors to delight us with their cold weather recommendations, from unique gift ideas and ways to look sharp in the cold to seasonal dishes and wines to celebrate with. Well, for this week's edition, Anita Riota sat down with Konfekt editor Sophie Grove on how to best curate a cozy festive soiree, pulling her best tips from Konfekt's The Perfect Welcome Guide to Hosting. Anita began by asking Sophie how she sets the scene.
I mean, we're limbering up for the season, and it's really a sense of getting the house ready and just getting that mood right. So I always like to start the season by going out into some form of woodland and just clipping some beautiful holly ivy. I'm up in the tree, getting the parasite known as mistletoe down. And then I think it's just a question of like really getting that sense of wild inside the house, but it's also festive. So that takes you back to this kind of idea of celebration that is kind of pre-Christianity. It's like this idea of evergreen is something that makes everyone feel really wonderful. But I always make a wreath with my children, and I did used to make wreaths before my children came along as well. But I think I like it to be a little bit shaggy and a little bit wild as well.
I love that. It also must be a very nice way to make the get-together seasonal and really embrace this wintry, blustery energy that we, at least here in London, have going on. Can you set the scene for us in any other ways? What are some touches, you said, like greenery, that you think really bring together the house?
So lighting, for me, is really a very important part of hosting. So I have just bought some silver antique Sheffield-made candlesticks, which I haven't used yet, but I will be using. I really just like white cream beeswax candles. Then I have a lot of glass candlesticks from Iittala in Finland and different, mainly transparent candlesticks and small little tea lights, but also your artificial lights have to work for you. You don't want overhead lights at a party or a dinner party. You really have to take those watts right down. When I'm talking like going down to like a 30-watt bulb on all your different 15 sometimes. If they're not deep enough, you can just paint them a little bit with some sort of like slightly sort of orangey, kind of brown, translucent paint. But I think you can really do anything once you've established that kind of like lovely sense that every corner is going to sort of make everyone feel like they're returning to that place next to the fire. And actually even a candle can bring that sense of warmth. You don't need to set the fire in the grate, which you might not have. And I do have a grate, but I think there's a lot of controversy around lighting fires in central London nowadays. So I don't want to recommend to do that live on air.
with your counsel at the moment. But we do, you're so right. There's nothing that kills the mood quicker than an overhead light. So then bring us to your table. How are you setting the table? Do you have anything, special that you keep tucked away all year long and this is its moment to shine?
So I'm a big fan of Basque linen. Janvier from near Saint-Jean-de-Luz, they make the most amazing linen for tablecloths and napkins. But I also like Ensoir Linen, which is a beautiful company in Switzerland. And I really like either just white with a bit of a stripe, or I've got the kind of blue and white. It doesn't sound that festive, but it can be made very festive. And then I really like just a mismatch, kind of sense of abundance. I like to tell the story of the table. Each piece has its own little tale. Was it discovered in a flea market in Saint-Germain? Was it found on a holiday in Berlin, in a little tiny antique shop? Polish everything up. Don't just keep all your silverware away and just never get it out. I think it's very objectionable when people do that. So I've got some Christoffel silver flatware, which I don't use every single day, but I get it out around now and just start bringing that to the table. And I think it's really about just feeling that sense of just using every dish, and then you have that wonderful sense of abundance, which is what this time of year is all about.
The latest issue of Konfekt, the winter issue, has taken a look also at these hosting do's, don'ts, themes, how to make everyone welcome in your home with a segment, The Perfect Welcome. Can you tell us what readers will find in there?
So we open the drinking and dining section with a piece about the cook, Mimi Thoresen, who is based now in Turin and just launched an amazing cookbook. But it's such a wonderful afternoon shopping and cooking with her. And she's just got this great philosophy. It's just kind of this beautiful apartment, an amazing cocktail, mixed for you at noon, this sense of just cooking and talking and chatting in the kitchen. I think there's a real sense that needs to be part of your welcome, that sense of ease, that sense of kind of like ebullience and joy, and you can sort of get people helping a little bit. She's got her children setting the table and lighting the candles, even though they really don't seem to be old enough to do that, but that's good responsibility. And then we have a great recipe also by the cook and artist Lena Boo. She's in the Basque Country, quite near when I get my linen from. I think it's a bit of Basque linen in that picture, but she's really popping corks here in this picture. And then she cooks everything on the fire. She's also foraging for holly on Christmas morning, and then everyone goes inside and has this wonderful roast beef, and it's that sense of these small details, the perfect canapé, the Gilda pincho, and this really kind of wonderful sense of colour and just fun. I think that's what really kind of is part of the principle of why we really love commissioning these pieces, because you get the essence of really that sense of generosity that you just need to kind of do all this planning. It has to be right, but then when people arrive, just let yourself go, and it's all about the moment.
Sophie Grove, editor of Konfekt, there speaking to Anita Riotta. You can find more tips on hosting your perfect get-together in the winter issue of Konfekt. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Anita Riotta and our studio manager was Christy O'Grady. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Have a great weekend just ahead of the holiday week. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.